Stephen Eady is a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. Stephen, welcome to Big 550 KTRS.
Hi, thanks a lot for having me.
You got it. You wrote a story called Rust Belt Revitalization, and since I guess St. Louis would count as a Rust Belt city, we thought it'd be nice to have you on and sort of talk about the future and what's going on. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks again.
So tell us, what are some of the takeaways from this Rust Belt Revitalization? You talk about go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, as a result of the last year's surprising result in the presidential election, we've seemed to be rediscovering the Rust Belt. There's a lot of discussion about what changes could be made at the federal level to help out these areas that used to be, real boom towns in terms of their concentration of manufacturing jobs, have seen a lot of decline over recent decades. A lot of talk about trade changes in trade policy, maybe investments in infrastructure coming to the federal level. I, in my report, try to focus more on what should be done at the state and local level. These cities have run up very significant debt loads in terms of how much they owe for bonds and also retirement benefit liabilities. Those are issues that are going to have to be addressed at the local level, with possibly also an assist from state government.
So St. Louis, I mean, we all know the problems here. Do you have one or two examples that have done it right? A lot of people point to like a town like Pittsburgh or Louisville. What are there towns that are doing it right?
Yeah, Pittsburgh is a pretty interesting case. Pittsburgh has seen very significant population loss. I mean, they've lost more population than most other cities in America. At the same time, they've managed to attract these kind of high-profile companies like Google, Apple, and so that have presences there that enable them to kind of overcome this notion that poverty is destiny, deindustrialization is destiny. I think a lot of cities find themselves somewhere on a spectrum. At the weakest places you're talking about maybe like Flint, Michigan, Youngstown, Ohio, real struggles. At the other end, New York, Boston, really vibrant, healthy cities. A lot of other places find themselves somewhere in between, but they're trying to move up to that ladder closer to the Pittsburghs, New York, and Boston.
St. Louis has tried to, in all sorts of ways, invest in their downtown with all sorts of historic tax credits and some type of metro transit. I mean, is that enough? Is it just scratching the surface? How far do these states and regions have to go to help revitalize these Rust Belt towns?
Well, what I'm trying to say in my report is let's talk more about what you can do to fix your budget versus what you can do in economic policy. I mean, economic policy, just so much uncertainty. When we talk about the real anchors of the post-industrial economy, we're talking less about what's happening in downtown, more at like hospitals, medical centers, higher education. Those are the real significant job growth categories that we've seen in recent decades. But in terms of the future, just a lot we don't know, and a lot that can't be controlled from the local level. Your budget, citizens should be able to expect that the streets are cleaned, that you're keeping people safe, and that revenues are being brought in line with expenditures, and you don't take on more debt than you can afford. That's where I think we should be having we should be focusing more of our attention these days.
But certainly, focusing here on St. Louis, because this is where we are, and I'm sure it's similar in other communities. We have a rotting infrastructure. The sewer system is well over 100 years. You got the water problems. You've got lead in the paint. You've got housing that is sort of lived past its usefulness. All the homeless concentrate in downtown. They have significantly more costs than everywhere else in the region, and so trying to sort of dig themselves out of that hole, they don't have the tax base to do it.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, in other states like in Connecticut, New York, there's a lot of discussion now about regional government. I'm sure you guys have had those discussions there as well. Overcoming local facing local borders, trying to kind of consolidate the suburbs and cities tend to be a very tough sell. That's why I'm saying we need to talk more about the role for state governments. Don't look to the federal government, because even if they could do anything, it probably wouldn't help in the near term. It's when you have really dire situations, it's going to have to be the state governments that come in and address the situation.
Yeah, but most state governments, like here in Missouri, our state government hates St. Louis.
Well, there's a long political history in both cases, but you know what? In Detroit, Michigan. When Detroit went bankrupt, you had a state government that was controlled by Republican legislators, a Republican governor, but who decided that we're really going to try to roll up our sleeves and fix this place. And Detroit is a city that faces many challenges. It's similar to St. Louis in a lot of ways, but Detroit is doing better off now than it was 10 years ago. So. Sometimes there is a political opening that's going to be created, but history does make things challenging.
Yeah. Stephen Eady, thanks for checking in.